Welcome to another episode of the Close Dudes Real Tool Reviews. Today we're going to be reviewing the Hypertough 12-volt reciprocating saw. It's currently available at Walmart with a 1.5 amp hour battery for $39. Alright guys, so how am I going to do the testing? Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to go over what comes inside the box. I'll go over its basic features and functions, but then the real testing and fun begins. I'm going to go over cutting a metal pipe with it. I'm going to cut a 2x4 with it. I'm going to cut a 4x2, and then I'm going to cut a 4x4 with some decking screws. Alright guys, enough blah 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 stuff. Time to see what comes inside the box.
Let's take a look at what comes inside the box. In addition to the saw itself, you also get two blades. One of them with larger teeth for cutting wood. You get a second blade that has smaller teeth for cutting metal. In addition to that, you get a 1.5 amp hour battery. This is a 12 volt battery at 1.5 amp hours, and there's a barrel port right there. That barrel port is for charging. The way you charge this is like so. You take this charger. This end obviously plugs into the wall. The other end has a barrel connector on it. That barrel connector goes directly into the battery. Once the barrel connector is in the battery and this end is in a plug, you'll get a red light while it's charging. That red light will turn green when it's fully charged. Once that light turns green, you know it's fully charged and you can remove it from the charger. You now have the fully charged battery, and you take that fully charged battery and you place it into the saw. And then you're ready to go.
Alright saw fans, let's take a look to see what the basic functions features are of this reciprocating saw from Hypertough. Here we go.
Alright guys, let's go over the basic functionality of this saw. One of the first things you want to do is install a blade. So one of the first things you do is you take the saw, and right here you see this metal collar looking thing. You turn that to the side. That is, you want to go counterclockwise as far this way as you can go. You turn it until it won't go any further. At that point you take your blade, and your blade, you take this side of the blade, and it slides right into there. And as you can see, once it's in, you release the metal collar, and that's really in there. To remove the blade, it's the same thing. You turn this outer metal ring counterclockwise, and you can remove the blade. I'm going to leave it in there so that we can see the blade moving for demonstration purposes. The next thing I'm going to point out is we have the battery. I'm going to be demonstrating right now with the 1.5 amp hour battery. When you put it in, make sure the writing or the contacts or the barrel port are facing you. All three are on the same side on this one. If you have a battery that doesn't have a label on it, the barrel port faces you. Alright guys, at this point I'm going to pull the trigger, and guess what? It doesn't start running. And the reason for that is there's the safety. The safety has to be pushed to the side, either this way or this way. You can push it either direction, it doesn't matter. So that lefties are just as good off as the righty-handed folks. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and push the safety and pull the trigger ever so slightly. And you'll notice that the blade is moving slowly. If I pull the trigger a bit more, it goes faster, and even more, it goes faster. That's because it's a variable speed trigger. Awesome. The other thing I want to point out is if I leave the safety engaged, that is, so that the motor will not run, and I pull the trigger, you'll notice that the battery life indicator comes on. In addition to that, there's a light on the front that also comes on. The reason why I'm pointing that out is if you have something to cut and it's kind of dark out, or you need a little bit of extra light, you can pull the trigger while the safety's in the do not run position, that is not pushed in, and you can get the flashlight, you can line things up, and once you get everything lined up, you can push the safety out off to the side, and then slowly pull your trigger, and then you can cut. Once you release the trigger completely, and you try to pull it again, you'll have to push the safety to the side one more time. The next thing I want to cover very quickly is battery removal. There are two little tabs on either side. You squeeze them both towards the center, and the battery comes right out. One other thing I want to mention about batteries. In addition to the battery that came with it, that's the 1.5 amp hour battery, I'm going to be demonstrating with this 4 amp hour battery so you can see the difference in terms of power and runtime between the batteries. At first glance, they may look like they shouldn't fit the same tool because they look shaped so differently. But if you look at just the top half of it, so basically from here up, you notice that they are identical. And if you look at it from this side, you'll see that they are identical. To place this into the tool, what you do is you once again make sure that the barrel port is facing you, and then you can slide it right into the saw. And there you go. And at that point, it's ready to go with a higher amperage battery. They're both 12 volts, but the higher amperage one should run longer. And what I found from testing, and so have other people, is that it also gives you a little bit more power. One last thing I want to mention. In addition to comparing the run times and power between the two batteries, I'm also going to be comparing it to a 20 volt reciprocating saw. Actually, two 20 volt reciprocating saws. And the reason why I'm pointing that out now is to make it clear I'm not trying to show that one is better than the other, because obviously the 20 volt tools are going to have more power. It's to let you see the differences between them so you can decide which one is right for you. In the case of this saw, it is smaller, lighter, easy to maneuver, and you can get it into tight spaces, such as maybe under a cabinet or something like that. Whereas The other one is larger, more powerful, but it's also bulkier and hard to maneuver. So when I'm doing my demonstration of this versus 20 volt, keep in mind, I'm not saying one is better than the other. What I am saying is they're different, and I want you to be able to see the differences so you can decide which one's right for you. But just always keep in mind that this one is much smaller and lighter and easier to maneuver. All right, guys, here we go.
All right, time for the first real test, cutting a metal pipe with the 12 volt reciprocating saw. The metal pipe to be cut is 26 millimeters in diameter and 1.5 millimeters thick at the walls. But just so you can see the difference between a 12 volt and 20 volt, so you can decide which one's more appropriate for what you need to do, I'm going to show the 12 volt on the left side and the 20 volt on the right side. So again, the one being reviewed in this video will be on the left. All right, guys, here we go.
All right, guys, I'm going to do the first test here. This is going to be cutting mild steel. I'll be using the Hypertough blade that I showed you before that's capable of cutting steel, and we'll see how it goes. All right, I'm starting off with the 12 volt reciprocating saw. We'll see what it can do. 3, 2, 1, go!
As one would expect, the 20 volt Hypertough tool is much faster at 7 seconds versus the Hypertough 12 volt tool at 17 seconds. I want to be very clear. It's an unfair test. The 20 volt tool is much larger, has higher voltage, and is not made to do exactly the same thing. It's a heavier tool. The 12 volt version is lighter and made to be used in places where perhaps the 20 volt tool won't work, or in very rare cases, people may just need the occasional cutting at the cheapest reciprocating saw they can find. If that's the case, that's why I did this testing, so that you can see the difference between the two saws, so you can decide whether a full-size saw is really needed or if you can get by with a really small one. But don't come to a conclusion just yet, because the next test is going to show an even bigger difference. All right, guys, we're going to do another set of tests. This time it's going to be a 2x4, and I'm going to show you something a little bit different. On the left side of the screen is going to be the reciprocating saw with the battery that came with it. On the right side of the screen, it's going to be the same exact saw, but with a higher amperage battery, so you can decide whether or not it's worth it to get the higher amperage batteries. Okay, guys, here we go.
3, 2, 1, and then go!
Alright guys, as you can see, the difference between the low amperage battery and the high amperage battery is about 10%. But as the testing gets harder and harder, you can see a larger and larger difference between the standard battery and the high amperage battery. But before I go into the next test, let me show you the same exact test again, except this time with two different 20 volt reciprocating saws, so you can see how much faster they are. Alright guys, here we go.
Go, 3, 2, 1.
Alright guys, as you can see, obviously the 20 volt tools were much faster at 6.3 and 8 seconds each. So vastly faster, but the question is, how often are you going to be cutting wood? If you can only do it every now and then, is it really worth it? It's hard to say. That's up to you. What I'm going to show you next though is the limitations to get worse and worse as you get to a wider and wider piece of wood. Specifically, once you hit the 4-inch mark, it gets really hard to cut with this 12 volt tool. And you'll see this in a second, because I'm going to take a 2x4 and turn it into a 4x2. How does that happen? Well, kind of like this. Huh, that was interesting. So what was that about? I'll tell you what it's about. That if you take a 2x4 and you cut the long end of it instead of the short end of it, you'll be cutting a 3.5 inch cutting surface instead of a 1.5 inch cutting surface. That's right, a 2x4 is really just 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. And if you cut along the 1.5 inch side, each stroke of the saw has to remove less material, but if you cut along the 3.5 inch side, it's got to cut more material, which is harder for the saw. And since it's harder for the saw to cut through the 3.5 inch side, the question is, will it be faster or slower going through the 3.5 inch side versus cutting it longer through the 1.5 inch side? Hey, let's find out. We're going to test it right now. Here we go. One thing a lot of people don't know about YouTube is, unless I get 1,000 subscribers, even if I get 1 million views, I won't get a cent from YouTube. If I don't get a cent from YouTube, then I'll end up living in a van down by the river. And I don't want to live in a van down by the river. So please, if you find this testing helpful, please hit the subscribe key. All right, guys, back to our regularly scheduled program. Here we go. Both screens are going to show the same exact saw, except on the left side it's going to have the included battery that came with your purchase, and on the right is going to be the optional higher amperage 4 amp hour battery. Alright guys, here we go.
3, 2, 1, go!
As you can see from the scorecard, the 4 amp hour battery was more than a minute faster than the 1.5 amp hour battery. But what you can't tell from just looking at the scorecard, that I could tell from operating the saw, was that near the end of that cut, the saw was definitely getting slower. There's a lot more vibration with that 1.5 amp hour battery compared to the 4 amp hour battery. So there's definitely more power, as we'll see in the next test. But before we get to the next test, I'm going to do the same exact cut, except this time with 20 volt reciprocating saws. Again, it's not a fair comparison. These are full size saws, but my goal is so that if someone's not familiar with what these saws can do, you can see the difference between a 12 volt, easily handled small reciprocating saw versus a full-size 20 volt reciprocating saw, so you can decide which one's appropriate for the tasks you have at hand. Alright guys, let's take a look at the 20 volt tools doing the same exact cut. Here we go.
No problem.
Again, as it comes as no surprise, the 20 volt tools were much faster, but I want to stress again, these are not fair tests because I'm comparing a 20 volt full size tool to a compact 12 volt tool that's designed to get into tight spaces or to be carried around where you don't want much weight. So again, I want to be clear, I'm not saying the 12 volt tool is bad, just understand the differences. Alright guys, let's go ahead and do a little bit more testing. This time, we're going to go crazy with a 4x4 and see what they can do. Not only a 4x4 by the way, but a 4x4 with screws. Here we go. Alright guys, what you're looking at here is a 4x4. I'm putting in 2 decking screws into the end of it so that when we use the reciprocating saws, we'll have to cut right through those decking screws to make it a little bit more challenging. Again, I want to stress this is vastly beyond what the 12 volt tool is designed to do, so I want to be clear that I'm showing you the outer limits, and I would recommend you never do this with your tool because I do believe it will burn out the motor or at least overheat it. It is definitely not really designed to do this kind of work. This is way thicker than its maximum cutting depth. Alright guys, you can see the screws are in, they're 4 inches. I've actually marked it with a pencil. I measured it out to make sure every saw is going to hit those screws. Alright guys, here we go.
2, 1, and go! You may have noticed it stopped a few times there for a split second, and that's because, by the way, at this point it will not start again, so the battery is totally shot. This is toasty. I'll tell you what. This is the absolute outer limit of what it can do.
Alright, Saw fans, as you can see, the 1.5 amp hour battery did not quite have enough to get through it. In fact, it only got through the first screw, but not the second one. But that is more than respectable for what this tool was intended for. It was never made to do anything like this. In fact, I'm impressed that with the 4 amp hour battery, it was able to go completely through it. It went through both screws and a 4x4, way thicker than what the manufacturer recommends for the maximum cutting depth of this tool. Having said that, it did get very hot, but that's very reasonable because I was abusing it. So why did I abuse it? It's so that if you've got reasonable projects to do, cutting small pieces of wood, and you're trying to figure out, is this good enough? Well, if you can see it can do this, you should be able to know then that it can do more sane things. I'm going to go over conclusions in about 2 or 3 minutes here. First, I'm going to show the same exact test, but with the 20 volt tools, just so you can see how they compare. And again, it's not this is better than that one because, for instance, the 20 volt tools are going to be heavier. This is going to be lighter. But let me just run that real quick, and then we'll do the conclusions at the end. Here we go. Just a reminder that I'm making these videos as a retirement hobby, and the only way I can get reimbursed from YouTube for the money I'm spending is if I get 1,000 subscribers. They don't actually reimburse me, but they will pay me per view once I get over 1,000 subscribers. So if you don't mind, help me keep this retirement hobby going, and so I don't have to live in a van down by the river, please hit the subscribe key. All right, guys, time to continue the testing.
So there you go, the 20 volt had no troubles doing it.
As you can see, Saw fans, the 20 volt tools had no troubles going through this at about 2 minutes each. So what's the real issue here? Why did I bother to include the 20 volt tools at all? Again, the reason is so that you can understand the difference between the power of the 12 volt and 20 volt. So if you're thinking about buying a smaller 12 volt tool, which I've done, and you want to know about where is its limits and would I be better off with the 20 volt tool, I hope this video has helped you decide that. All right, guys, time for the official conclusion section. What is my conclusion after all this testing? It is this, that the 12 volt Hypertough reciprocating saw is really good up until about 2.6 inches. And guess what? That's where the manual says it's its cutting depth. So cutting, let's say, the 2x4s on the short end, it had no troubles whatsoever. It cut it. It was not as fast as the 20 volts, but you wouldn't expect it to be. It is 12 volt. And therefore, as long as you use it within what the manual says it's safe to do, which is 2.6 inches and less for wood, you should be fine. At least I was. And one of the major advantages to this saw is its size and its weight. It is much lighter than the 20 volt systems, easier to maneuver, and smaller in a bag. And actually, I have 12 volt tools specifically, so if I'm going to run a quick errand at a friend's house and help them out some small project, I can carry all of my 12 volt tools in one bag. If I did the 20 volt tools, I'd have a couple of bags and they'd be heavy. This way here, if I'm going to just do a quick odd project for someone, and I know I'm not going to need anything big, this is fine. I don't intend to cut anything larger than a 2x4, and if I had to cut a bunch of them, I'd bring my 20 volt stuff. So I'm very happy with it. The quality in general of the Hypertough 12 volt line feels really good. That's the impact drivers, drills, everything. And the reason why I point that out is when you're buying a tool, you want to look at the other tools inside the same system so that you have exchangeable batteries or interchangeable batteries. And I am very, very happy with the Hypertough 12 volt systems. Overall, all of the tools have been really good. They're not super powerful because they're 12 volts, but they seem really well made, especially for the price. I mean, you can't beat it. $20, $30 drills, impact drivers, and they seem to work just fine. They're not as powerful as their 20 volt cousins, but man, they do work. So the biggest thing I'll say is this: before you get your first tool that takes a battery, is look at the other tools that take the same battery, that is inside the same battery system. Typically that means they'll be from the same brand and the same voltage. For instance, Hypertough 12 volt in this case, or Hart 20 volt, or Hypertough 20 volt, whichever it is. Then look at that battery system and see what other tools use the same batteries so that you can interchange them as needed, so that if you have lots of tools and one of the batteries starts going down because you've been using it for a while, you don't have to go out and buy a second battery to swap up and back, because you'll have it because you bought the other tools. And then they can all share the batteries, and it's a lot easier that way. Of course, sometimes that's not practical, because sometimes you have some 12-volt tools, some 20-volt tools, some specialty tools from another brand. But to the extent that it's practical, that's how I like to go. In terms of power, all thing I'll say is, for the only downside of the Hypertough 12-volt system is it's 12 volt, and that's pretty obvious. So it's not going to be as powerful, but just the quality of the build, especially with the price, to me feels fantastic. Just a disclaimer, I am no way associated with Hypertough or Walmart or anything like this. I'm just some retired dude that started making videos after an injury. I retired a couple years ago because of some health issues. I couldn't keep working, and then I started going stir crazy, and I started making these videos. So I have one request. If you found this testing helpful, please hit the subscribe key, because without 1,000 subscribers, I don't get paid by YouTube. All right, guys, I hope you found this helpful. And again, I know in the comments people say, oh, it's not fair to compare a 12 volt to a 20 volt tool. It's not, especially if you're saying one's better than the other. I'm just showing the differences. So I hope that was clear. And again, I'd really appreciate it if you found this helpful. Hit the subscribe key, and you guys have a great day. And thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great day. Bye, y'all.